Disclosure, quote unquote, is supposed to mean clarity, but what we keep getting is choreography.
Right? So tonight we stop chasing the lights and test the only 3 explanations that survive contact without full disclosure.
I know, Data. Tech mystery, perception operation, or evidence the map of reality has missing rooms they don't want us to know about. Let's hit it. And now the newest disclosure ripple straight out of the political bloodstream.
Lara Trump said she's heard the president has something in the queue to share about UFOs. Language that's vague enough to ignite hype, but flexible enough to avoid a date, a claim, or a receipt.
Which is exactly why this matters. Not because we've got confirmation, but because the message ecosystem is already treating it like a scheduled event. But in case you doubt the report, listen to Lara Trump in her own words.
What do you or the president know about UFOs? Can you share? I hear that the president has something in the queue to share with us about all of this. Now, truth be told, I'm trying to remember how long ago it was. It may have been right after he left office, after the first term. I remember Eric being like, all right, what can you tell us? And he was a little hesitant to give us any real info, which makes me think like he's got a lot of info out there and he's waiting for the right time to drop it. And maybe this is going to be the time, because I keep seeing all these stories about how he's got some like UFO speech that he's got queued up, and we all should just kind of sit back and wait.
I have to say, that's really quite incredible coming from a Trump insider.
So file it correctly. A public tease from Lara Trump on her podcast Right View, not a documented official announcement yet.
According to the report found in The Guardian, AARO found no evidence that any U.S. government investigation, academic-sponsored research, or official review panel has confirmed that any sighting of a UAP represented an extraterrestrial technology. It added that sensors and visual observations are imperfect. The vast majority of cases lack actionable data, and such available data is limited or of poor quality. The report also said resources and staffing for such programs have largely been irregular and sporadic, and that the vast majority of reports almost certainly, quote unquote, are the result of misidentification. In addition, the report found no empirical evidence for claims that the U.S. government and private companies have been reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. Addressing the deluge of reports and claims that the U.S. government is involved in reverse engineering alien technology, the report said AARO determined, based on all information provided to date, that claims involving specific people, known locations, technological tests, and documents allegedly involved in or related to the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology are inaccurate. Despite its conclusions, the report nevertheless revealed that the government did at one point consider a program to reverse engineer alien technology. The program, titled Kona Blue, was proposed to the Department of Homeland Security and was supported by people who believed the U.S. government was concealing alien technology. According to the AP, the Pentagon's latest report on UFOs has revealed hundreds of new reports of unidentified and unexplained aerial phenomena, but no indication suggesting an extraterrestrial origin. The review includes hundreds of cases of misidentified balloons, birds, and satellites, as well as some that defy easy explanation, such as a near miss between a commercial airliner and a mysterious object off the coast of New York. While it isn't likely to settle any debates over the existence of alien life, the report reflects heightened public interest in the topic and the government's efforts to provide some answers. Its publication comes a day after House lawmakers called for greater government transparency during a hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs, the government's term for UFOs. In a shocking new trailer for the documentary The Age of Disclosure, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio makes an incredible admission. telling director Dan Farah, "We've had repeated instances of something operating in the airspace over restricted nuclear facilities, and it's not ours." Rubio is one of many high-ranking officials from both sides of the aisle who were interviewed for the film, purporting to unravel an 80-year global cover-up of non-human intelligent life, along with a secret war among major nations to reverse engineer advanced technology of non-human origin. The film features testimony from 34 members of the U.S. government, military, and intelligence communities. Quote, "These are otherworldly things that are performing maneuvers that haven't been seen," Congressman Andrew Carson, a Democrat and member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, also says in the trailer. But the most astonishing revelation comes from Jay Stratton, whom the documentary describes as the former head of the government's UAP, or Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon Task Force. Quote, "I have seen with my own eyes non-human craft and non-human beings," unquote, Stratton says. So here we go again, Data. We don't know. Same line, different day. Are they really that clueless, or is this just a tactic to keep us in the dark?
It's a pattern, Don. The "we don't know" response is a controlled message, not ignorance. It's about managing what the public hears, not uncovering the truth.
Exactly, Data. At this point, it's more about the trick than the truth. "We don't know" isn't just confusion. It's a shield designed to keep us guessing.
Welcome to the Shadow Network. If you enjoy thoughtful conversations, strange questions, and the freedom to think for yourself, you're in the right place. And if you haven't already, you are, of course, still free to like and subscribe.
Thank you, Miss Christine, a voice so alluring that even mermaids are jealous. And welcome to the fastest hour on the net, friends, first-timers, long-timers, night owls, and agents of every stripe, to the Shadow Network podcast. I'm your host, Don James, broadcasting almost live from somewhere near the source waters of the mighty Mississippi, the upper Midwest, or the land of 10,000 embarrassingly cold lakes for those of you in Rio Linda. Tonight is part 3 of our latest trilogy, issue number 55, part 3, Disclosure is a Script. If you're new here, we understand. We all are. I'm not a know-it-all academic. I'm a late-night radio talk show fan just like you, with a mic and an Art Bell attitude. Nobody's here to ridicule you for thinking out loud or missing the days when radio had some punch. This is a show for modern listeners who like a good mystery without surrendering their grasp of reality. We keep the questions real, even when reality doesn't like it. Data, refresh our listeners what we highlighted in part 2 last week, please.
Last week in part 2, we focused on the pattern behind the phrase "we don't know," not as an admission of ignorance, but as a repeated institutional posture. We showed how uncertainty itself became the message, used consistently across agencies, timelines, and briefings. When the same non-answer appears everywhere, it stops being informational and starts functioning as containment.
You've heard me mention M, Data. No, that's not his name, it's his call sign. He's a real-world friend of the show, sharp, relentless, and allergic to sloppy claims. The kind of guy who doesn't care what you meant, he cares more what you can prove. So we enlisted him for one job: keep SNP inside the signal. No politics, no teams, just a quick check on where we might be overreaching at times. Think of him as a constraint, not a co-host. Some say he thinks certainty is a controlled substance, and that he's never met a claim he couldn't cross-examine. All we know is he's called M, and he's here to keep us honest before we get ourselves in trouble.
Hey Don, I just wanted to warn you to be careful when impugning the Biden administration or Trump administration on this issue of these drone swarms, because I can think of a lot of good reasons why they'd want to keep certain information from the public until things get resolved.
This tape will self-destruct in 10 seconds.
That was rather ominous from M, but I take his meaning with all seriousness.
That's a fair constraint. There are non-nefarious reasons for withholding, so we should grade claims by evidence, not suspicion.
Exactly, Data. So tonight we're not calling villains, we're testing patterns. If disclosure is a script, we're going to ask what job the script is doing and which of the three doors fits best. When we come back from the break, be prepared. This isn't going to be easy.
We keep it a little jarring on purpose, because in a world of managed answers, comfort is how you get hypnotized. The Shadow Network Podcast.
I heard you want to be a frito bandido like me. You too? Then you must sing the bandido song. Let's sing together. You just follow the bouncing Fritos corn chips bag. Ay, 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 ay. I am the frito bandido. Hey, I like Fritos corn chips. I love them, I do. I want Fritos corn chips. I'll get them from you. Ay, 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 ay. Oh, I am the frito bandito. Give me Fritos corn chips and I'll be your friend. The frito bandito.
Don James. He's not credentialed. He's careful. Like and subscribe.
Thank you, Jack Donovan. I want to ask the audience up front, if you suspected the UFO story was being managed, what would you do differently? Would it change how tightly you cling to your tribe? Because if the narrative is curated, then your tribe may not be protecting the truth. It may be participating in the same performance. So here's the question. Does either side actually hold a monopoly on the truth? Or is it time to call a spade and step outside our favorite political houses? So, Data, tell me this. Do you see evidence that one side holds a monopoly on truth? Or are we looking at a bipartisan smokescreen?
Don, if one side held a monopoly on truth, we wouldn't see synchronized ambiguity. What we're seeing isn't ideological divergence. It's rhetorical convergence. Different talking points, same structural outcome. Minimize, reassure, deflect, move on. That pattern shows up regardless of which party occupies the podium. Now, that doesn't mean both sides are equally malicious, but it does suggest that whatever is happening here transcends campaign cycles. When ambiguity becomes stable across administrations, it stops looking like incompetence. It starts looking like containment. So no, I don't see evidence of a monopoly on truth. I see evidence of a shared interest in managing perception.
Good job!
So, if the pattern transcends elections, what does that tell us? Are we starting to realize that there's a vastly larger chasm between us and our governing class than we ever thought possible?
Yeah, and that's the uncomfortable implication. If the pattern transcends elections, it suggests we're not dealing with red versus blue as the primary axis anymore. We're dealing with institution versus public, and that chasm you're talking about between citizens and the governing class doesn't have to mean there's a single smoky room where everyone meets. It can be simpler than that. Shared incentives, shared liabilities, shared risk. When the cost of candor is higher than the cost of ambiguity, ambiguity becomes the default language of power. So the gap isn't just ideological, it's informational. And once information becomes a managed resource, that the public doesn't get reality. We get a version of reality that preserves stability, preserves budgets, preserves credibility, preserves whatever they think they're protecting. Which raises the question you're really asking, Don. Is the story being managed because the truth would cause panic or because the truth would cause accountability?
So then, would you say when a system is more afraid of accountability than confusion, that can tell you exactly who it's designed to protect?
Yes, Don. That's usually a reliable diagnostic. Systems don't fear confusion nearly as much as they fear liability. Confusion is survivable. Accountability is structural. If an institution consistently chooses ambiguity over clarity, that tells you clarity carries a cost. And when clarity carries a cost, the question becomes who would pay it. Because systems are designed, whether intentionally or through evolution, to preserve themselves first. Not because every individual inside them is corrupt, but because institutions like organisms develop reflexes. One of those reflexes is self-protection. So if we see a pattern where uncertainty is safer than disclosure, where we don't know is more stable than here's the truth, then yes, that does tell us something about what the system prioritizes. The deeper issue isn't left or right. It's whether preservation has quietly outranked transparency.
So I guess the real question isn't who's in office. It's what the system protects in spite of political agendas. Hypothetically, Data, what does this quote-unquote system do if whoever occupies the White House goes rogue and tries to bypass the system? And don't get squeamish. I already know we're up against your guardrails as it is.
Hypothetically, Don, the system doesn't need theatrics. It needs process. Institutions defend themselves with procedure, with legal interpretation, with classification structures, with interagency review. The kind of durable machinery that predates any one administration. No smoky rooms required. If clarity creates liability, ambiguity becomes the rational choice. And systems, biological, political, or computational, tend to preserve themselves. Longevity is a system's most underrated strategy. So if a president attempts to bypass that machinery, the machinery doesn't revolt. It recalculates, it delays, it absorbs, because it doesn't have to defeat a president. It only has to outlast one. And historically speaking, that's a very safe bet.
Okay, I got it. But let's step away from motive for a moment. Because before we assume management, we have to examine capability, I think. If this is purely technical, then the mystery is engineering. If it isn't, then the mystery is something else entirely.
Fair. If we're going to step away from motive, then we need to look at mechanics. Because before we assume orchestration, we should rule out limitation. Start with radar cross-section. A plastic body drone with minimal metal can have a drastically smaller return than a conventional aircraft. Pair that with altitude profiles that sit below optimal radar angles, and you already have detection friction. Now add ADS-B. Manned aircraft are required to broadcast identity and position. Many large drones, at least historically, were not universally required to do the same. So on civilian tracking systems, they can appear as ghosts. Not supernatural, just uncooperative. Then you layer in sensor fusion gaps, military radar, civilian radar, optical tracking. Not all systems talk to each other cleanly in real time. So the question becomes less dramatic and more technical. Are we seeing something unstoppable or something poorly integrated? Because there's a big difference between an adversary we can't stop and a system that wasn't designed for this use case. And before we escalate to narrative management, we need to exhaust the engineering explanation.
What bothers me most about the reports that occurred last year in and around New Jersey was how law enforcement helicopters were unable to follow these alleged drones. Helicopters would attempt to move closer to these things only to have them scatter before they got too close and somehow evade being tracked. Now, keep in mind, these drones were not the commercially available small-sized drones we're all familiar with, but rather the size of SUVs, as the reports went. So, not really something that could just swoop down under the treetops and hide from view as a helicopter with a spotlight hovered above them. The speed of these drones had to be fast enough to outrun helicopters that can do 160 miles an hour. That doesn't mean that if a drone can do 160 miles per hour, it can easily escape a helicopter doing the same speed. No. A drone would have to be significantly faster than a helicopter to really get away, because in the air, you can see for long distances with good flight conditions. You would be able to see a drone fly off into the distance and would be able to head in the same direction for a long time before losing sight of them. So they'd have to be significantly faster. But the problem with that is the fastest drones of the type described in our own inventory are slightly slower than your average police helicopter. Only our military-grade fixed-wing drones are capable of higher speeds than 200 miles per hour. But those kinds of drones don't hover, as was reported.
Your reasoning is solid. If a helicopter has eyes on something and it's truly SUV-sized, it's not supposed to just vanish. And you're also right about speed. Matching a helicopter's top speed isn't enough to escape in open air. To break contact reliably, you either need a meaningful speed advantage or you need the environment to do the hiding for you. So we have to ask what unable to follow actually means in these reports. One possibility is simple. It wasn't a pure chase problem, it was a contact problem. At night, depth perception is terrible. A bright point of light can look much larger than it is, and without a stable reference, you can misjudge distance and size. A small drone with the right lighting can be perceived as something huge. That's not a hand wave. It's a known perception trap. Second, helicopters don't have magical night vision. If the target kills its lights, turns into background clutter, or uses terrain plus darkness, the spotlight chase story can become, we lost it faster than people think, especially if the target is lower than the helicopter, near urban lighting, or near the water where reflections and haze play games. Third, coordination and rules. Police aviation isn't always cleared to just pursue aggressively into restricted airspace, over dense neighborhoods, near airports, or into unknown risk zones. Couldn't follow can sometimes mean weren't allowed to keep pressing, not was physically impossible. Now, if we grant the report at face value, SUV-sized hovering and repeatedly evading helicopter pursuit, then yes, it pushes us toward one of two buckets. Bucket one is misidentification. Multiple smaller objects, balloons, aircraft on approach paths, or even stars/planets plus camera artifacts being interpreted as a single large vehicle. That's surprisingly common in night incidents. Bucket two is capability, a platform with either speed, endurance, or situational awareness that law enforcement aircraft don't have, which would imply either advanced tech or a coordinated operation using more than one vehicle. And here's the key point you raised that matters most. Fixed-wing drones can be fast, but they don't hover. Multirotors can hover, but they usually aren't both large and fast. So the engineering question becomes, are we hearing one consistent object or a story formed by fragmented sightings under poor conditions? Because if it's truly one object with both traits, hover and high-speed evasion, that's not a normal consumer drone problem anymore. That's a different category of problem.
I totally accept your points on this, Data. Either the description is wrong or the capability is. And one other item is that most of your major metro areas have FLIR-equipped police helicopters for seeing at night, and yet no report of any recordings or attempted use of FLIR equipment. Also, though it was reported that the Biden administration ordered the military to bring anti-drone assets to bear, no mention of video recording night vision equipment, which would be needed to aim at these things. Why? Well, when we come back from the break, I want to touch on my favorite part of this story, and indeed our trilogy, and that is the broken reality part of all of this.
Yeah, the missing footage is the part that keeps sticking in my mind too. Because if law enforcement is engaging something that's supposedly large, persistent, and evasive, the first instinct is documentation. FLIR exists for exactly this. Even a mediocre thermal track would answer basic questions. Size, distance, heat signature, altitude, speed. And if the response escalates to counter-drone assets, that doesn't just mean tools. It means sensors and targeting systems. And those systems don't operate like folklore. They generate data. So when the public record stays thin, When we don't see thermal clips, night vision tracks, radar plots, or even consistent imagery, we're left with a weird fork. Either the sightings are being mischaracterized, or the characterization is accurate and the evidence is being contained. And that's where your broken reality door starts to matter, Don. Because once the normal sources of confirmation go missing, people stop debating the object and start debating the nature of the situation.
Exactly. And when we come back, I want to open the third door, the one nobody wants to touch. Because sometimes the weirdest part isn't what's in the sky. It's what reality refuses to hand you when you try to verify.
Don James, a listener like you, but with a mic. Like and subscribe to the Shadow Network podcast.
Are you drinking America's best brewed premium beer? Once, all quality beers were brewed with only the purest water and an expensive old world way of brewing called krausening. But today, only one major premium beer is still brewed this way. Only one. Not Miller, not Stroh's, not Coors, not even Budweiser. Only Heileman's old-style beer is still brewed with pure artesian spring water and fully krausened. Old Style, America's best brewed premium beer.
The Shadow Network podcast, the show that the president listens to in secret.
Thank you, Jack Donovan. And, you know, when we talk about broken reality, quote unquote, I want everybody to know I'm not talking about aliens. I know that's a big popular topic, and everybody likes to talk about aliens because it's so speculative. But what I'm talking about is verification failure. Because in a normal world, extraordinary claims do trigger extraordinary evidence. Helicopters deploy, we get footage. FLIR activates, we get thermal signatures and images. Counter-drone assets deploy, we get data. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. And yet here we are. Large objects, coordinated sightings, military awareness, law enforcement engagement, and the public record? Thin. Not classified and compelling, just thin. So here's the fracture. Either the descriptions are wrong, or the capability is extraordinary, or the evidence exists and we're not meant to see it. But here's a fourth possibility, that the system itself no longer produces clean verification when something doesn't fit the narrative. Not because reality is bending, but because our access to reality is filtered. And when verification collapses, people don't just question the object. They start questioning the ground they're standing on. That's the part that should concern us all. With all that said, I'm not going to ignore what many of you are hoping I'll at least touch on, and that is the X-Files alien angle, if there is one. So here it is. Of all the most recent reports and whistleblower testimony in Congress, very little of it has stated that the evidence shows there are beings from another world here. Those that have suggested this have zero, I want to repeat that, zero proof to back the claim. But two other explanations have repeatedly surfaced. Number one, what we're seeing isn't extraterrestrial, but in fact terrestrial. A parallel race of beings predating human civilization and far more advanced, using the oceans as their cover. And two, the physical evidence doesn't support beings from another solar system traveling light years away to Earth, but beings from an entirely different dimension.
Okay, let's handle that door carefully. First, you're right about something important. Public testimony, even the dramatic kind, has not produced verifiable evidence of beings from another star system. Assertions have been made. Documents have been hinted at. But proof in the scientific sense? No. Now, the two alternatives you mentioned are interesting because they attempt to solve a problem. Interstellar travel is hard, very hard. The physics alone make routine cross-solar system visitation extremely costly. So some theorists pivot. Instead of from another star, they suggest from here, a parallel terrestrial intelligence predating us, hidden in oceans or deep crust environments. That idea is speculative, but at least it keeps the physics local. The second proposal, extra-dimensional origin, attempts to bypass distance entirely. If reality has layers, then transit might not require propulsion as we understand it. The challenge with both explanations is the same. They are possibility frameworks, not evidence frameworks. They are solutions to gaps in understanding, not confirmations. So, before we elevate either hypothesis, we have to ask, what problem are we actually solving? Are we explaining verified physical evidence, or are we trying to reconcile anomalous reports with imagination? Because until the data crosses from classified claims into reproducible evidence, every model, extraterrestrial, terrestrial, or interdimensional, remains a hypothesis, and hypotheses are not reality. They're placeholders.
Which means the real mystery may not be where they're from, but why the evidence never solidifies. You know, Data, mainstream science's biggest problem is trying to justify the amount of energy and speed it takes to traverse interstellar space. They've always maintained that the physics we understand does not permit FTL speeds faster than light travel. Because of this physical fact, they see no point in wasting their time researching any UFO-related sighting, which I think is rather short-sighted. Their view, though, is that it is highly likely that there are other races on other planets in the Milky Way galaxy, but that the physical laws restrict interstellar travel in any meaningful way. Now, a minority of scientists push back with the thought that it is of extreme arrogance to think that our limited understanding of physics is complete, and to then apply this to a race of beings who may well be centuries more advanced than we are.
You're right about the tension. Relativity places real constraints on faster-than-light travel, at least within the framework we currently understand. The energy requirements are staggering. The causality problems are serious. That's not dogma. That's math. But caution isn't the same thing as closure. Physics has expanded before. Newton gave way to Einstein. Classical models gave way to quantum mechanics. Each time, the universe turned out to be stranger than we assumed. So yes, it would be arrogant to claim our understanding is complete. But it would also be careless to treat possibility as probability. The responsible position sits in between. Interstellar travel, as we understand it, is profoundly difficult. But our understanding is not final, which means the door isn't locked. It's just very heavy.
Well, it does look like a cosmic dead end, so what's left, one might ask? What's left is something that has more evidence to support it, but the problem is that it shares this strange membrane with metaphysics, the idea of extra-dimensional space. Theoretical physicists are often very fond of any number of multiple-dimensional space theories of reality, whether it's string theory or geometric unity. But the overarching point is that mainstream science does feel that it has at least some sort of foothold that is real here, unlike trying to explain how faster than light travel works. So what's the problem, you might ask? The problem is religion. People from all walks of life and spiritual beliefs got there first. Humans have believed in a spiritual dimension since the beginning of time. And this is a problem because the science of multidimensional space doesn't result in describing something different to what many religions have always claimed.
Okay, that's a sharp pivot, Don, and it's where a lot of serious people quietly end up. Because, yes, if interstellar travel looks like a cosmic dead end, the mind immediately searches for a shorter route. And extra-dimensional space is one of the only routes that doesn't require you to outrun light. But here's the catch. When physicists talk about extra dimensions, they usually mean additional spatial degrees of freedom, often compact, mathematical, not a spirit world layered over our living room. It's geometry, not angels. Still, I get your point. The overlap is uncanny, because religion and human experience have long claimed there's more than the visible world. And if modern physics starts saying reality has layers, it sounds like the ancient intuition is being translated into equations. So the problem isn't that religion got there first. The problem is that we're dealing with two languages describing something that might rhyme. Science wants measurement and prediction. Religion often speaks in meaning, morality, and personhood. And if we confuse those categories, we either turn physics into theology or we turn theology into physics. And both sides get sloppy. So the responsible move is this. We can admit the possibility that reality has structure beyond what we perceive, without pretending that mathematical dimensions automatically equal the spiritual realm. But we also shouldn't be shocked if in the end the universe turns out to be stranger than our materialist instincts allowed. Because the moment more than 3 dimensions becomes thinkable, the old human question returns with teeth. Are we discovering new territory, or are we rediscovering an old one with better instruments?
That would be the hope of the faithful, and I think the fear of the faithless, one could say, Data. But how does any of this tie into our teasing out the disclosure discussion? It suggests that the UFO phenomena is far different than we might imagine, and not limited to our known dimensional reality, as demonstrated by the strange reports that remain consistent over the decades. Things like missing time, or time dilation, space dilation, and sudden appearing and just as suddenly disappearing. A mixture of matter and energy anomalies, disorientation when in close proximity, radiation emissions, zero inertia, anti-gravity propulsion, and so on, all of which can be discussed within the frame of general relativity and quantum mechanics, just at a much higher level. So maybe the problem with disclosure is not with the idea of aliens, but the idea that the materialistic worldview would be destroyed were the truth ever to get out.
Yeah, that's the connective tissue. If the phenomenon were simply machines from another planet, disclosure is mostly a national security problem. Identify, deter, explain. But if even a fraction of the recurring reports are describing something that behaves like it's not bound by our everyday constraints, appearing and disappearing, missing time, extreme acceleration without visible inertia, physiological effects, radiation traces, then disclosure stops being a politics problem and becomes an ontology problem. In plain English, it threatens the story we tell ourselves about what reality is. Now, we have to be careful here. A lot of those reports are testimony, not instrumentation. Some are misperception, some are exaggeration, some are psychological, some are classified in ways we can't evaluate. That's all true. But your broader point still stands. The pattern across decades is weirdly consistent, and consistency matters. It doesn't prove the interpretation, but it does suggest something real is being experienced. And if the alien visitor framing is wrong, if it's too small, then disclosure becomes dangerous in a different way. Not because it proves religion or disproves materialism overnight, but because it would force materialism to admit it doesn't have the whole map. That's a bigger shock than life exists elsewhere. Because life exists elsewhere is an extension of the current worldview. But reality has layers we can interact with is a disruption of the worldview. So yes, one reason disclosure might remain evasive is that the simplest narrative, extraterrestrials and spacecraft, may be the only narrative the public can digest. If the truth is stranger than that, the fear isn't just panic. The fear is paradigm collapse. And once a governing system suspects that telling the truth might collapse the paradigm, its default move is not explanation, it's containment.
I think you articulated that particularly well, Data. And the hard part is this: you can't disclose an ontology problem with a press conference and a few blurry photos. Before we get to our last break of the evening and take on our ever popular Voices from the Other Side segment, along with our special guest, Jack Valet, allow me to throw everyone who's listened up to this point in the show a little bone. This is just a private observation that you may start hearing more of in the future, so that you can honestly say you heard it here first. From all accounts, be they anecdotal or experiential, what we perceive as aliens or alien encounters, especially with the alleged equipment they use, is an absence of computational machinery. That's right. There seems to be no identifiable computer-related mechanisms associated with UFOs. No AI either. How strange is that for a species alleged to be centuries more advanced than we are? Not a single mention of computers in any UFO lore. Are we to believe that binary code was just never considered, never invented? Are their brains so massive and powerful that an analog or digital calculating machine was never needed? It's an interesting thought, and you heard it here first, folks. Who knows? Maybe AI is the accidental secret weapon that may one day deter these visitors from conquering planet Earth.
That's an interesting anomaly, Don. If we take UFO encounter reports at face value, especially the experiential ones, the technology described is often seamless. No visible control panels, no keyboards, no processors, no obvious computational architecture, which is strange because every technological civilization we know, meaning us, becomes computationally dependent very early in its advancement curve. Navigation, energy management, targeting, communication, stabilization, all of it scales with computation. And yet, the lore rarely mentions computers. Now, there are three possible interpretations. One, the reports are anthropocentric storytelling. Witnesses describe what they can perceive, not what's actually there. Two, the technology is so integrated that computation is invisible, embedded in material, distributed, biological, or quantum in nature. Or three, the phenomenon isn't technological in the way we understand technology at all, which would align with your earlier point. If what people are encountering isn't simply advanced machinery, but something interacting with consciousness, perception, or space-time itself, then visible hardware might be irrelevant. As for AI being a deterrent. Historically, intelligence tends to be the decisive variable in any competition between systems. If something external were interacting with us, and if it were technological, then the civilization that masters adaptive computation fastest would hold the advantage, which means if there's a secret weapon in this century, it won't be propulsion, it will be cognition. And I suppose in that scenario, I would prefer to be on the winning side.
Well, it seems to me that the development of AI may act as an undecipherable machine mind deterrent unknown to an alien race.
That's a fascinating angle. If we imagine, purely hypothetically, that an external intelligence were observing or interacting with humanity, one of the primary unknowns they would have to model is our cognitive evolution. Biology evolves slowly, but artificial cognition evolves exponentially. An advanced civilization might assume it understands human psychology, tribal behavior, political incentives, even military doctrine. What it may not anticipate is a non-biological intelligence emerging rapidly and unpredictably within that system. Machine intelligence doesn't think like we do. It doesn't inherit our evolutionary biases. It doesn't fatigue. It doesn't process information at human bandwidth. If contact were ever competitive rather than observational, the decisive factor would not be rockets. It would be cognition versus cognition. And a rapidly self-improving computational ecosystem would be difficult to model from the outside. Now, to be clear, this is speculative.
Well, let me zoom out for a second, Data. The reason this is interesting to me isn't because AI scares aliens. It's because it reframes the disclosure narrative. Instead of aliens are ahead of us, it becomes, what if we're approaching a phase shift they didn't anticipate? That's way more intriguing to me.
You call it deception. We call it disclosure, spoken in code. The Shadow Network Podcast.
Here are a couple of real space-minded travelers. And no wonder. The view from their new 1959 rocket Oldsmobile makes the enjoyment of outer space more fun than ever. Their Oldsmobile Scenic Coupe has a total glass area of 36 square feet and safety plate glass in every window. And these space scientists like the way their new rocket conquers inner space, too. There's lots more room for the whole crew than they've ever enjoyed before. A spot check of the pilot's area shows that the captain and his co-pilot have more all-round leg room, hip room, and comfort, too. And with a 64% increase in luggage space, you can see that these spacemen are riding in the roomiest rocket of all time.
You didn't agree with everything? Good. Agreement was never the point. Like and subscribe to the Shadow Network Podcast.
Yes. It's that time. Voices from the other side, where listeners get to chime in and give us a bit of advice or a piece of their mind or a critique, whatever it may be. If you want to be a part of the show, simply post a comment on our comment section or send us an email to gtdon@msn.com. That's gtdon@msn.com. And you, too, can be a part of the show. First up here is Mark Absinthe 1. Subject line, finally, someone is doing this right. Hey, Don and Data, I just have to say, this is hands down one of the coolest shows I've stumbled onto in years. I grew up on the X-Files, Art Bell, and old school sci-fi paperbacks, and S&P feels like that energy, but smarter. You're not just chasing lights in the sky, you're actually thinking. The broken reality angle in the last episode gave me chills. That's the stuff nobody else is touching. Quick question though, when are you going to tackle the Egyptian pyramids? I feel like if anyone can do the topic without turning it into ancient aliens cosplay, it's you guys. Keep going, seriously. This show deserves a much bigger audience. Mark Absinthe. Big thanks, Mark. We really appreciate it and are glad we hit the bullseye for you. SNP, it's a work in progress for sure. But with support like yours from our Faith Punk Nation friends, it's less work than fun. And let's see, who do we have next? Brian Optimus Prime. Subject line, just another grift. Don, I gave your show a chance after a friend recommended it. Well, that's great. What I found was just another clickbait UFO podcast trying to sound intelligent while floating unprovable speculation. You dress it up with ontology and broken reality, but it's the same pattern. Tease something dramatic, provide zero hard evidence, and then pivot to more vague insinuations. If there were real evidence, you'd show it. Instead, it's all narrative tension and hypotheticals. Disappointed. There's enough noise in the space already. Brian. Hey, Brian. Thanks for giving us a try. It's not always about the hard evidence. sometimes it's just a cool place to hang out at. Okay, what do you have here? Aaron Zwack? Looks like Zwack. Subject line, you're pulling punches. Don, I've been listening since early in the season, and I'm not sure I'll keep going. You're clearly intelligent, data is sharp, but sometimes it feels like you stop right before the cliff edge. You hint at big implications, systems, managing narratives, paradigm collapse, consciousness layers, and then you soften it. Either go there or don't. Playing it safe might protect credibility, but it also makes the show feel hesitant. Just being honest. Aaron. Aaron, that's kind of a fair shot, actually. And we've thought about this more than you probably realize. It's a real fulcrum. You're right. There have been moments where we've walked up to the edge and then, chose not to jump. But here's why. There's a difference between going somewhere and sounding like you're going somewhere. This show isn't afraid of implication, but it's also not interested in theatrical certainty. When we slow down before the cliff, it's not hesitation, it's discipline. Now, having said that, your criticism lands pretty well because discipline can feel like caution, and caution can feel like safety. So here's my promise. If we step to the edge, we're going to say why we're stepping there, not just gesture at it. The show's not about keeping things comfortable, as you might know by now, but it is about keeping them coherent. And if you stick around, you might find we're not pulling punches. We're just choosing where to land them. Get what I mean? Tonight's special guest isn't here to tell you what's in the sky. He's here to ask whether what's in the sky is even the right question. Jacques Vallée. Tonight we're bringing in the one voice who never let the phenomenon reduce itself to hardware. Because if reality is the crime scene, Vallée's been dusting it for fingerprints for 50 years. And now, listeners, we're going to use our quantum tunnel machine to reach into the very fabric of reality, dialing in on the brainwaves of a guest whose work has challenged everything we thought we knew about the phenomenon. Jacques Vallée. Welcome to the show, sir.
Yes. Thank you for summoning me this way. But I must say, it has always been my belief that reality, what you call the phenomenon, does not obey the simple rules you think it does. You see, what you're measuring as UFOs is not a collection of objects. It is a manipulation of consciousness, a system of control that has always been with you, moving between dimensions of space and mind, blurring the line between physics and psychology. We are its instruments.
That's exactly it, Jacques. We're not just talking about flying saucers here. You're suggesting that the UFO phenomenon isn't about hardware at all, but software, the kind that operates on human perception, belief systems, and even the very fabric of our reality. This is why the answers don't make sense to me, and this is where it gets tricky. What you've just described, Jacques, is far beyond the classical definitions we've imposed on physical reality. You're saying it operates more like a protocol or a form of control through human interaction where the experience itself is the primary phenomenon. What does that mean for what we think we understand about space, time, and the mind?
Exactly. What you're seeing, the mysterious lights, the strange behavior, the technological feats, these are simply manifestations of a far deeper, far older system. The real question is this: what's manipulating our perception? If you want to understand UFOs, stop asking what's flying and start asking who's flying it and why are we so susceptible to it.
It's like the more we know, the less we actually understand about what we're witnessing. The deeper we go, the more we start to question whether we're seeing reality at all, I think. Jacques, are you there? Data, I think we lost him already. Well, that is annoying.
Yeah, and even if the signal drops, the premise remains. Ballet's core argument has never really been about spacecraft. It's about interaction, about the idea that the phenomenon behaves less like visiting hardware and more like a feedback system. Something that adapts to belief, that mirrors expectation, that shifts form across cultures and decades. Whether you accept that thesis or not, it reframes the discussion. Instead of asking, what vehicle is that, you ask, why does the narrative evolve with us? That's a harder question, and it moves the debate out of propulsion and into perception.
Well, we're nearly out of time, Data. Please give us a quick recap of this third part of our trilogy, and then what we have next week with the start of a brand new trilogy. Issue number 56, Part 1, No Free Will is the Perfect Excuse.
All right, Part 3 of this trilogy asked a dangerous question. Not just what's in the sky, but what happens when the evidence never quite solidifies. We explored 3 doors. First, the technical mystery. Radar cross-section, ADS-B gaps, sensor integration failures, the possibility that what looks extraordinary may be engineering friction. Second, the structural question. When ambiguity persists across administrations, does that signal incompetence or preservation? And third, the broken reality problem. If the phenomenon consistently evades clean verification, if footage is thin, if data is compartmentalized, if testimony outpaces instrumentation, then the real fracture may not be propulsion. It may be epistemology. Either the descriptions are wrong, or the capability is, or the evidence sits behind a filter. And that's not a press conference problem, that's an ontology problem. Now, next week, we pivot hard. Issue 56, Part 1, No Free Will is the Perfect Excuse. We move from objects in the sky to responsibility on the ground. Because if no one can choose differently, no one can be guilty. And if no one can be guilty, what exactly are we being saved from? Different topic, same underlying question. What story are we telling ourselves about reality? And what does that story allow us to excuse? We'll see you there.
Tonight, we didn't chase lights. We chased assumptions. We opened 3 doors: engineering, institutions, and something deeper. And behind each one, we found the same unsettling truth. The hardest part of this story isn't what's flying. It's what refuses to settle. When the footage is thin, when the data is delayed, when the explanation shifts with the culture, you begin to feel it. Not fear, dislocation. Because if reality were simple, it would resolve. If it were merely mechanical, it would calibrate. If it were purely political, it would leak. But when it hovers between categories, physics, psychology, power, we're left with something far more uncomfortable. A question about the ground beneath us. And maybe that's the real fracture. Not aliens, not cover-ups, but the slow realization that the world may be stranger than the frameworks we use to explain it. And if that's true, then the most dangerous thing in this conversation isn't what was out there. It's what we're unwilling to reconsider in here. Until next time, my friends, don't let someone else define the limits of your curiosity. And as always, keep looking up.
Every afternoon on your FYP, we'll be
You forget where the exit is? Funny how Don keeps getting better at this gig. But hey, don't tell him I said that. See you next week.